you so much for inviting us to give us some amazing perspectives today. I've got two distinguished guests here. I have Ramita Tandon from Walgreens. Ramita, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got here today.
Yeah, thank you, Fatima, and thank you, everybody. Ramita Tandon, the Chief Clinical Trials Officer at Walgreens. I actually started at Walgreens about a year ago. As we move as an organization into healthcare, we're undergoing a significant transformation. My role is to build out a clinical trials business that I launched earlier this year. And it's really about providing healthcare services into our local communities. So super excited as we talk today about sort of the axis of insights and how insights can be valuable, particularly in the specialty pharma ecosystem.
Fantastic. Patricia, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here today. It was nice to also be on the panel yesterday as well. So my name's, again, Patricia Walsh. I'm a Senior Vice President with Novartis. My role is I sit in the data, digital, and IT organization. I lead those areas for the innovative medicines business, which is all the different therapeutic areas across pure pharma and oncology. Very pleased to be here today, and in particular, how I got here was I'm very close friends with the former CIO of Pfizer, which is where I worked previous to Novartis, and he actually had recommended me to Mike Hollis to participate in the event yesterday and today. So I just want to thank the team for including me and the opportunity to share some thoughts today.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here. Again, I'm Fatima Farouk. I get to serve as Chief Health Officer for Salesforce. But as we get into the discussion today, I'd like to focus a little bit on just thinking about all of the data that's out there today from a healthcare perspective. And we're really trying to explore a little bit more on how we change the future as it relates to pharma collaborating with the last mile and the delivery systems that are out there. And so with all the data, and I'll start with you, Patricia, that's out there, especially regarding specialty pharma, how do we work on improving the pathways that are there? What kind of data do you use on a day-to-day basis? What's there? What's not there? Tell us a little bit about that.
So it's actually kind of interesting, and actually as we were prepping for this panel, one of the things that I highlighted was when you look at the pharmaceutical industry in particular, and this is what I'm sharing is from an industry perspective. It's not for any specific pharma in particular, but ultimately, when you see the data sets on the pharma side, the richest, most ample data is available during clinical trials. Once you move beyond that and really a drug is moving over to the promotional side, that's really when, I'll call it the walls go up. That's when you have to think about, the restrictions on a greater level in terms of, patient privacy, things of that nature. And that's really when it comes into play with regards to the data sets, it's where the partners that we have within the industry have such a large role to play. It just changes immensely when you get to the promotional side, because once you get to the promotional side, really what, when you look at the United States as an example, prescriber data is going to be really the key asset that we're able to leverage. In addition to that, there's vast purchases of data, right? Anonymized data across the board. So really at that juncture, I think, in some cases, the guardrails are there for the pharma organization to then really reach in and partner with, entities like Walgreens.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your perspective.
Great way to tee it up. At Walgreens, obviously, as we make this transition and go through the significant transformation and going into healthcare, certainly leveraging information or insights on the pharmacy records that we have access to. I mean, certainly, as an institution, we have 9,000 stores across the U.S. 78% of the U.S. population is within 5 miles of a Walgreens. We service around 100 to 150 million consumers and patients that visit our stores and pharmacies. So we have tremendous information on what's happening with our patients. Now, we're making some investments. We are not only leveraging our pharmacy records, but we have access to over 300 million EMR records. So as we bring together a patient's pharmacy record as well as their clinical record, both structured and unstructured, it enables us to give us, powerful insights on what's happening with the patient's treatment journey. And so as we think about, health data, it's more about just generating the insights from that information and supporting a number of use cases. At Walgreens, we're looking at a number of use cases, whether it's, finding patients for trials, a lot faster than perhaps what's happening today. Using that information to hyper-personalize how we deliver care within our communities, where our stores and pharmacies are located. How do we get better connected with our patient populations that are in our communities? We learned a lot during the COVID-19 pandemic when we administered over 70 million vaccinations across the US. It was not a one-size-fits-all strategy across our communities. We had to be, active listeners. We used the information, both from a consumer data perspective as well as what's happening on the clinical side, to really start to deploy the right strategies into our communities and ultimately educate and empower our patients in these communities to make decisions and get vaccinations in their arms. So we're leveraging a lot of the learnings that we got from COVID-19 pandemic as we apply those learnings through our journey as we move into healthcare.
I think Walgreens' story is so fascinating. I think you guys are very well positioned as we think about the future to really make a difference in that last mile in care. Certainly, you have a huge footprint. You've got a number of brick and mortar stores across the United States, and you arguably have, again, a very unique position as it relates to people being able to access you from a care delivery perspective. When you think about that, and you think about all the data that goes along with what you know about these people within their communities, where are you limited? How should we best make this data accessible? And how should it impact our partners? And how do you think together with the right partners you can make a real difference in the industry?
It's not so much, I think as we look at it as understanding, from a patient perspective, the insights, what's happening with the patients with their care, right? As we think about the specialty space, these are, highly, the most sickest patients. They're highly chronic, complex disease conditions, and we're learning. When they pick up their scripts from the pharmacies, the minute they leave that pharmacy, we start to, create engagement models that make sense for that patient. We're using that information to, again, become more hyper-personalized. But more importantly, we're trying to identify the best ways to deliver healthcare into these communities. And so today, within our locations, we've got 200 plus locations that are outfitted to become healthcare destinations, where we have healthcare services like screening, diagnostic, and phlebotomy services. We're using those same centers, and we've converted them into clinical trial centers, where now, for example, when manufacturers are looking to conduct clinical trials, rather than having patients go into research centers that might be too far from them, we're now having patients come into our Walgreens to have clinical trial visits done. So these are just examples of how we're leveraging insights to better personalize a variety of healthcare services into our communities.
That's pretty amazing, and we'll get into more of that, how we deliver equitable care and trials and novel innovations in this space to patients, again, more equitably across the population. Mm-hmm. Patricia, to your end, what are your thoughts on making the data accessible, right? Who do you want to partner with to really make a difference in the industry?
So for myself, I look at it as, in the industry, it's partnering with the likes of Walgreens. It was interesting. The other piece was yesterday evening, I met a gentleman from Oracle who just acquired Cerner. It's those types of partnerships that, in the industry of pharma would be enormously beneficial. Because on the pharma side, again, it goes to the earlier points, there's a cautiousness that we have to really be very conscious of. Because when you're getting into that patient realm, when you're on the promotional side, that personally identifiable information, again, it's just, addressing those situations appropriately so. And it's through the partnerships that I see the enormous opportunities. So with Walgreens and other players like that. It was interesting, again, earlier we were talking even about clinical trial enrollment. That's a big challenge for the pharma industry. And if you think about it, partnering with the likes of a Walgreens who has this enormous, access to patients and the patient information, taking that one step further and partnering with healthcare systems could actually expedite, the filling of clinical trial enrollments. So I think that becomes really a really nice like opportunity for the pharmaceutical industry itself in healthcare.
And I think, Patricia touched on something that's important. It's about thinking differently. It's about creating new set of partnerships that perhaps we've never even thought about in the past, right? So who would have thought, pharma looking to partner with a retail entity like a Walgreens to be able to, unlock the insights that we have on our patients and use those insights to support whether it's R&D or even on the commercial side.
Yeah,
right.
If I could on that one, it just brings me back to several years ago when I was working at Pfizer. I remember we were working with pharmacy segment and ultimately looking at the front of store and back of store data.
Yeah.
And then looking at the time it was smoking cessation, and then when you look at that space itself, what other products is someone putting in their basket in that area? The insights you can glean from that store setting is incredible. And using that really to help advance the patient outcomes, things that they need to consider in terms of their health, total health.
Your points are very well taken. It kind of describes my own career journey, right? I essentially started in the EHR world where I ran research and development around AI and machine learning, got to use a lot of these records to figure out what was happening with longitudinal health outcomes, and ultimately struggled because behavior change is so hard. And so today I'm at Salesforce, right? So I get to work with the customer, the patient 360, where I get to look at all of the different forms of data, right, that really impact consumer behavior change. And that's where, again, we've partnered with folks like you from a technology perspective to ensure that can happen seamlessly and easily. And so when we think about, putting the patient at the center, or thinking about, how we meet the needs of our populations in different communities, I'd like to understand specifically what you both are doing as it relates to ensuring that we can deliver equitable care. So Ramina, I'll start a little bit with you. You did allude to some of this in our earlier question, but I'd love to understand a little bit more about Walgreens' approach to equitable care.
Yeah, look, we know healthcare is extremely fragmented today, and as Walgreens moves into this journey into healthcare, our goal is to sort of disrupt this fragmentation and create this 360 ecosystem of support for our patients in their communities. It's not going to happen overnight, and we recognize that. But we are activating our physical infrastructure across the nation, whereby it makes it convenient for patients to be able to go into their local pharmacies and to be able to get the care that they're looking for that they've not been able to get in the past. So we're trying to create that engagement. We're making investments in primary care. We're making investments in specialty, and we're making investments in home health, because we recognize there's aspects of healthcare that can be delivered during at patients' homes. And so for us, it's about we're in across the nation. We're in communities that perhaps have not received care in the way they should be receiving. Look, in the world of clinical research, for example, less than 5% of the U.S. population participates in clinical trials. And of that cohort, 75% are Caucasian male. What that means is that the medicines that are coming out there today are not representative of the U.S. population. So one of the changes that we're driving within Walgreens is how do we bring clinical research or trials into communities so it's viewed as a care option? That's just an example for us to be able to drive, equitable care as it relates to the world of clinical development.
Yeah, I commend you for that work. Again, it's just absolutely unacceptable in this day and age that those are our statistics, right? And we really need to figure out how to get a more diverse population that's representative of the people that are in our communities into clinical trials. And I think, again, it's a huge opportunity for Walgreens, given your presence. Patricia, I'd love to understand a little bit more about your thoughts as it relates to delivering equitable care from a pharma perspective.
It's a tough question for pharma, I would say, for one. Again, just by the nature of the industry itself. But some of the thoughts that that come to mind for me is, one, if I go back to clinical trials, I think partnering and trying to make sure that you've got the right demographics being across the broad scale with regards to participation. The other piece that comes to mind for me is, in specialty pharma today, it's so important to support the patient on their journey. So in doing so, there's naturally, you look at the patient journey, you look at from diagnosis to being put on therapy and then supporting them throughout that process. And more pharma companies, including Novartis, have platforms in place. I know at Pharma, we have, at Novartis, in our industry, we have the patient support platform for specialties specifically, and right now in just a few therapeutic areas, but ultimately, it's a way to better support the patient in their journey and their continuing, the continuing journey on health, effectively. And ideally, if it helps with adherence, it helps them with their support along that journey. Those are some of the things that are happening today.
And I would say, just from a technology perspective, I would agree. I mean, we're making some significant investments on the technology side as we start to enable that workflow and make it easier for patients to participate or just be able to get into our locations. But, as we activate our locations, particularly start to leverage our pharmacists and our pharmacy care teams that have a significant trust within these communities, how do we have that open dialogue with the patients and consumers that come in that want to understand more about their health as they start to learn more about their disease and get more proactive about managing their health. So there's aspects of technology. We certainly saw that during the COVID-19 pandemic when we had to activate telehealth, for example, and we had to keep the patients engaged throughout their healthcare journey, right? So I think technology has a big part in helping to support the workflow to kind of disseminate more equitable care, but it's also thinking outside the box, like we as a retailer are activating our locations and starting to leverage our physical infrastructure and our pharmacy care teams to support some of that dialogue and that delivery of care.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, again, a phenomenal example, right? As it relates, the technology is there. We know that the technology is there. We think that the data might be there or maybe not. Let's talk a little bit more about that. I mean, how do you think that these things that are all coming together, are going to really impact innovation as it relates to the future of making clinical trials more available to people? What are some of the challenges you're having? So I want to hear both sides.
So for me, if I take a step back and I think about, I'm going to bring it back to the patient journey, right? Because you've got clinical trial enrollment. There's lots of technology that can be used in those settings, whether it's remote monitoring, all different diagnostics along the way. But if I actually bring it back and I think about, post that process, once patients are diagnosed, they're on therapy, there's so many technologies out there now across the journey to help the patient, help them adhere, help them, one, even get diagnosed, if you think about it, with wearables today. So I think more and more it's really reaching in, making those tools and capabilities more accessible to patients through then the healthcare system, ideally, to advance diagnosis. And I've seen this being done in a variety of ways, whether it is, for AFib and using wearables to help monitor proactively AFib in a non-intrusive way. It might also be working with the healthcare system, leveraging technology to really, in many respects, mine data to advance diagnosis. So there's lots and lots of use cases, and I think that's the key, is coming up with what those use cases are, but ideally partnering across the industry to solve them together.
Hermina, I'd love your thoughts on that.
I think the way we're defining, innovation, obviously there's different ways of defining innovation outside of technology, but, from a retailer's perspective, we're pouring in a lot of investments as we activate our physical infrastructure to support some of the patient journey, to make it more convenient and improve experience. But ultimately, our goal is to, move away from this fragmentation that we're seeing in healthcare, close the care gaps, and create these clinical care models that we're building within the ecosystem of Walgreens. But for us, that's innovative in itself. Those who think about the pharmacy infrastructure, we're a 120-year-old entity that has been seen to dispense medications to patients, and so we're thinking big, we're going bold, and we want to reimagine how we deliver healthcare into our local communities. And I think that's important for us to unlock, the capabilities and the assets that we have, the partnerships that we bring to bear, because we recognize this is not going to happen on our own. We are creating unique partnerships that will enable us to unlock those capabilities within the communities and start to innovate how we deliver healthcare. So from our perspective, it's a journey that we've started. We're using our infrastructure to deliver healthcare services. So to me, that's innovative in itself. But I think more importantly, we're very focused on driving better access. I think that's the biggest challenge, is how do we make healthcare more equitable and more accessible across the nation? And that's the most important thing that we're very focused on as a retailer.
So as you get more and more into care delivery and thinking about, again, how you make clinical trials much more accessible to the populations that you serve, you're increasingly more in the space of care coordination. Who's responsible?
I hate to say it. It's such it's like a personal question in some respect, And for me, when I look at my own personal life, I look at what I've gone through with my own family members. What I've seen time and time again is care coordination. It's in the hands of the patient and their caregivers. And it's the extended family, helping people advocate for themselves, navigate the healthcare system, look at the total patient, look at, all the different, let's face it, at the end of the day, we suffer multiple comorbidities. So looking at that total picture and understanding the relationship between the different medications people are on or the different treatments that people have to take, at the end of the day, it's the person, and it's the family surrounding them that, in my personal opinion, that's really who has to own that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. And I guess I would add, from a pharmacy perspective, especially in the specialty space, we are very focused when a patient, is dispensed their medication. Then it's about how do we continue that follow-up, that engagement, so we don't see care gaps. So I think to some extent there is that patient ownership and responsibility, but I also think there's other entities that can help support that journey to make sure that we are reinforcing that care that's supposed to be delivered in an equitable way, or it's accessible, it's happening. And obviously we know adherence is a big issue in the industry. And so from our perspective is we are leveraging our pharmacists to become more integral part of that process, where there is coordination with the patient, follow up with the patient to make sure that they've taken their medications, intervening where we need to. Certainly we've made investments in Shields Health, where they integrate their care delivery models within 75 healthcare systems across the nation. And so part of it is to create that 360 support system for that patient, so they feel like they are truly supported, both themselves and the caregivers. And so we're going to continue making those investments as a retailer to not only empower the patient to feel like they've got the information they need, they've got the support, and they own some of that coordination, but also that they feel like they're supported as we wade into healthcare.
Yeah, I think certainly from a trend perspective, we are seeing that increased level of collaboration, right? To truly manage the patient and deliver out on that care coordinated experience. There's a couple of empty seats here, and I know we had one speaker, unfortunately, who couldn't make it, but I think perspectives of payers are incredibly important in making sure that the incentives are aligned so that each one of you in your respective pieces of the industry can ensure that there are appropriate incentives to make sure that these gaps in care are covered. I think also there's the provider systems as well, the traditional provider systems. So I will call that out as well, and I wish we had invited them to this discussion as well, because I do think that they play an integral role here as well. As we think about tracking some of those longitudinal outcomes and thinking about what truly happens to patients once they go away, and it's no longer about the episodes, it's the information that's in between the episodes of care that becomes increasingly important. So I'm going to give you all each a magic wand, and you only get one wish, just one. What do you fix?
Well, something we were talking about, and actually a panel earlier today talked about it, is how do you create, and the thing it's not even fix it, if there was a magic wand, what would you do? It's give that full view of the patient and drive unbelievable collaboration, bring all these different stakeholders together, look at the total patient, what's all the data then look like for each of those different areas? And how would you knit that together to drive ultimately the best outcome for the person? I think that would be tremendous, and it's difficult. None of this is easy to solve, and no one has solved it yet. But I think that would be pretty intriguing if we were to do that.
Yeah, I would agree. We're making investments, as a retailer to stitch together, for example, the pharmacy records, the patient's clinical records, both structured and unstructured data. So we've got, over 300 million records that we're sitting on, and it's pretty powerful in terms of the information that we have, and to be able to support a number of use cases, depending on the types of partners that decide to help support and support the operating model. But look, at the end of the day, it's going to require the ecosystem of stakeholders, whether it's payers, healthcare systems, retailers, and pharma, to come together and create these partnerships that perhaps have never had, that we've seen before, and to be able to think differently as we look to start to solve some issues. But again, as we draw on the focus on this panel is around insights and data. And so we're making the investments as we bring those pieces and parts together. We have information to help support a number of use cases. And we are looking for partnerships to be able to help us enable better delivery of equitable care, accessible care. We're activating our locations. So we're doing what we can do, and we're trying to move the needle. But we agree that we need to be able to see partnerships to be able to enable that full workflow to be able to be activated altogether.
All right, well, I'm going to give myself a wish too. I'm up here with you. I think, from my perspective, I'd love to see the patient having ownership of their data. I mean, we carry a phone, we've got our Apple Watches, whatever it is, everywhere we go, and we're generating data from almost every aspect of our lives. I think other industries outside healthcare have done a really good job of harnessing this data and leveraging the heck out of it to drive insights and to drive consumer behavior. We haven't necessarily done that in healthcare very well, and I think that as a foundation, combined with collaboration across the industry, from payers, from provider organizations, from retail health organizations that are now in clinical trials, from pharmaceutical companies, from med device companies. I think if all that were to truly come together and be owned by the patient, we might actually be able to create more equitable access to care, but it's got to be easy to understand. One more question. What keeps you up at night?
I have to think about that one.
Well, I can tell you. I mean, obviously, with the launch of the clinical trials business, at Walgreens, the number of less than 5% of this nation participating or accessing clinical trials is a daunting figure. And as we go into communities, or I personally go into communities, and I start to talk to patients and consumers, I get sort of two opinions, if you will. One, they probably have never heard about clinical research, or two, they've got a lot of mistrust with Big Pharma, for example. And so it's about how do we start to tackle some of the systemic barriers that exist within this nation, particularly in communities, unsupported communities or communities of color that are not receiving health care in an equitable, or don't get access to health care. And so, I think everybody sees us as a retailer because we have this national scale, because we have this, strong footprint. How do we activate that to be able to help our communities that really need the help? And so for us, it's about thinking about who do we partner with? How do we start to create those partnerships that will enable us to unlock that piece that we need to get care into our communities? That keeps me up at night. And we recognize it's not going to happen overnight. And so it is something that we continue to think through as an organization as we're going into our communities and delivering healthcare services into our communities.
Do you mind sharing a little bit more about, I know we were talking earlier, do you mind sharing a little bit more about the patient perspective as you think about this and delivering equitable care in some of these communities that haven't historically had access to clinical trials?
It's hard. I know we were, as we were talking earlier, I mean, when we're going down in the Deep South, for example, and we're thinking about technology, we're thinking about digital modalities, we're talking about the fancy wearables, tools. I had a woman that came up to me and said, look, I don't get free data plan until 6 p.m. onwards. So are you planning to keep your stores and pharmacies open in the evening or in the weekends where I can do what you guys want me to do? And so, and then you think about sort of the medical deserts out in the rural areas like the Dakotas or Wyoming, they don't have access to sophisticated healthcare systems that are so convenient to them. I mean, these are farmers that have big lands, and they're looking for ways to get healthcare delivered in a convenient fashion. And so during the COVID-19 pandemic, we had mobile units that were being, run around in different areas so we could get people vaccinated in these rural areas. And so that's the reality of the nation. And so those are things that we have to think about as we look at technology or as we look at different modalities to deliver healthcare into these communities. We've got to be culturally relevant of what's happening within these communities, and that's the most important thing. At least that's what keeps me up at night as well. Listening to the patients and the communities live. That's happening today.
Thank you for taking that into account and thinking about it from the patient perspective. Trisha, I'd love your thoughts.
So for me, what keeps me up at night, there's one thing relative to the job, right? And I'm going to put that aside. It's more when I look across the industry. People are suffering. I think that's the hardest thing out there. Suffering, they're not diagnosed. They don't have access to the healthcare they need. And then once they get diagnosed, I would say navigating the healthcare system itself, which for me, it's not something for pharma to solve. It's not something for pharmacy to solve. It's more the industry overall, and how do we come together and really, put the hat on of the patient, the person suffering who needs that care, and how do we solve that together? How do we streamline, the healthcare system? I think that's the challenge. If you think about it today, it's easy to, get a cell phone. It's easy to get access to on-demand entertainment, right? It's sad, things like that. But when you think about healthcare and people suffering, getting access to the care you need, that for me is something that's really a tremendous challenge in our industry that if we could come together and figure out how to solve.
Yeah, well, thank you for both of your points today. I think everything, again, very well taken. We've talked about some really heavy issues. I think ultimately, what has come out in this discussion is the need for collaboration. It's loud and clear. And the need to think about solving problems differently. It doesn't have to be, again, necessarily the most advanced technology, but to be innovative, maybe it is just the collaboration, us sitting down together and figuring out how to do this. Mm-hmm. So thank you again for being here today, and thank you to our audience.
Thank you.